Hi.
Oh, there we go.
We're on the internet.
Hi there.
We're going.
Sorry. There's a bit of a lag between what we're doing here and what's showing on Twitch. So
yes, that's normal.
Yes.
Question:
hi,
who's hosting this panel?
I am.
Yeah.
Oh,
According to your website, I'm the host. Hi, I'm Ian Watson. I'm the community manager for Onyx Path Publishing, and with us today we have in the top corner this way, I think, is Eddie Webb, who is our in-house developer for pretty much everything that isn't licensed from White Wolf.
Basically, yeah.
We have Dixie Cochran, who is our in-house developer for Exalted and Chronicles of Darkness, and
Hello.
she is also in charge of editing, basically. And we have Mike Tomasek, Hollywood, who is a relatively new freelancer. He worked on Geist, he worked on Chicago by Night, and we're all here to talk to you about the production process from outlining to the end, when you get your book.
The end.
How does that work?
The end is the best part.
The end is nigh, indeed.
So let's get started. The pitching process. Would anyone like to start us off on telling us how the pitching process works?
I feel like that's an Eddie question. He's dealt with the most pitches of all of us.
I was about to say, I was like, I'm usually the one who receives them usually. So yeah. So the pitching basically really boils down to, hi, I'd like to make a game or a book, and I'd like to sell you on why that game or book should be made. It can be, in some companies, like an elaborate process. I mean, if you've ever seen something like Dragon's Den or Shark Tank, that's basically pitching. Here's our company, here's our idea, blah, blah. We don't do anything that elaborate. Generally speaking, when someone wants to pitch a project to us, I try to keep them down to about 2 pages. Then basically, what we do is that those 2 pages come in, and then I usually look them over when this is coming in for something. Occasionally, I think I think Exalted Essence, for example, there was a pitch to you, Dixie.
No, I pitched that.
Oh, fair enough. Okay, you wrote it.
That was me pitching that.
Well, then you accepted your own pitch, and it was like, "Yep, this is great." Or I don't know. I mean, I don't know your process. Maybe Dixie was like, "No, Dixie is terrible. Dixie."
I mean, that's my process. I have anxiety, but no, that was a joint an endeavor with me and the other Exalted Essence devs. I was kind of like, I want to do a rules light Exalted. Someone who knows Exalted, tell me how we should do that. And all the Exalted devs and writers were like, you want to do what now? Let me give you all of the best ideas that we've had for the past 2 decades. And I was like, yes, put them in this document.
And that's definitely a part of it. That's one of the reasons why I personally like to keep it down to a couple pages, is because it's so easy, especially when you have lots of ideas, to go, it'll have this and this and this and this and this. And then it's a lot for people like me or Rich to parse. Sometimes we pitch to other licensors like White Wolf, Paradox. And the more information you give to somebody else like that, the less likely you are to grasp all of it. And also it makes your ideas seem unfocused, right? It makes it seem like, well, you have a million ideas, but what's going to go on the back cover of the game? What's going to be what's the thing we're going to say in the booth in 2 minutes? So the pitch really helps to make sure that process is distilled down, and then you get a better sense of, okay, this is the core of what this book needs to be. So yeah, that's really kind of the pitch process in a nutshell. Then I give it to Rich. Rich looks at it, gives comments. If we need to revise it, we go back. The person who said pitch and revises it. If it needs to go beyond that, then once Rich is happy with it, it goes to Paradox or a licensor, and they review it. And they also say, what they do and don't want to see out of the book. And sometimes pitches get spiked. Sometimes they just don't go any further. It's like, nope, we're not interested in doing this project. We're not cool, and this is not going to work out for us. Or it's kind of like another book we're doing, whatever. And that's another advantage of doing it in a couple of pages, is because it's only a couple pages of written. You're not throwing a whole book out, right? It's just like, well, okay, well, we're not going to do that. It's cool, thanks. And then you can rework that and take it somewhere else.
Yeah, I think that the Exalted Essence pitch was only like a page or so, where it was just kind of like, in the vein of, Shadowrun, Anarchy, and Fate Accelerated, we want to do a rules-like version of Exalted. Here are some things we'd like to streamline. We just kind of kept it very, like, one page, here's what we want to do. We're not going to do an outline or anything until you approve it. Like, there's no point, like, doing all that work until it's ready to be approved. Like, exactly. We want to do this. We think there's a market for it. But we don't know. Let us know what you think. And luckily, both the team at Onyx Path and White Wolf are on board with that. So,
Mike has actually thrown a pitch at me earlier this year at Midwinter. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about what it is, but
it's still under wraps, and still under development too, for that matter.
Basically, the answer was no, not right now, because you don't really know the Trinity Continuum. Mm-hmm. So get a little experience under your belt, and then we can come back to it in the future. So a no isn't always a no. No, sometimes it's take some time, think about this, or maybe like you have half a concept, so try filling that out a little bit, or bolting another thing onto it to make it more round, and then try resubmitting later in the future. So don't be dismayed if we have to tell you no. Pay attention to how we're telling you no.
Absolutely. Get good.
And after
we just throw it in your face. Get good, scrub.
It's just like, what? You want to do this?
You
Gosh.
Just stand here and like just stare you in the eye while I slowly rip the manuscript in half.
They just like,
throw it in a trash can.
You wanted to create something? Never. So no, but that was a really interesting process, because as a person who's only developed one thing, and I had this idea that I was rolling around and still rolling around. It was good to be able to talk to that line developer and be able to go, I know, I'm going to talk with my hands. This is a thing. Remember, anybody who watched me do the Chicago by Night panel, I just did this the entire time. But like, it was good to be able to talk out the idea and to be able to like explain it to someone, because while it's really great to have that idea in your head, actually expressing it is, one, kind of difficult, and two, it's good to be able to understand where the developer is coming from and where the line developer is coming from, and go, how do you feel about this? What can we do with this? Is there anything that's going on that's kind of like this already? So it was kind of a nice process.
And Tragedy Jones asked, is there a preferred pitch format? If you go to our website and scroll all the way down to the bottom, there's a link that says submission guidelines. All of the information on how to make a submission to us or make a pitch to us, it's all in there. So if you're interested in writing for Onyx Path, please read that document. One of the things we look at in a freelancer is the ability to follow guidelines. So if we're telling you how to make a pitch submission and you think that doesn't apply to you because your idea is too cool or whatever, we are going to ignore that submission. Yep. So please follow the guidelines as written on that page. A lot of cases, like Eddie is the one who goes through all the submissions. Some of the stuff is just so completely out there, like ignoring all of the guidelines we have written, like almost like someone set out to ignore the guidelines that are written, and we just have to throw those out.
And like,
I do have a...
Sorry, go ahead, Eddie.
I was just saying, I do have a folder on that email account that's specifically labeled hilariously wrong. So.
Yeah, there's wiggle room if we say like 1,000 words, 500 this, 100 that, and you send us 1,100 or even 1,120, we probably won't castigate you. But if you send me a 13-page PDF, I'm not reading that. Like, I'm not. And like, I've gotten some submissions that looked cool, like fully arted out, like 13-page PDFs, and I'm like, maybe that's community content. That's not a submission. Like, that's not what we asked for.
And as a freelancer, I would like to remind everyone like that is out there that wants to write for Onyx Path and things like that, is that this is a really good exercise to see whether or not you can handle this. Because when you're writing, you're going to be given this chunk of words, and you're going to go, okay, when you first start out, you're like, what does that even look like? I mean, maybe if you went to college or, you did essays in high school, you might go, okay, I kind of understand what this is, but really it's very different. And going 500 words of text, 500 words of rules, or 2 pages for a pitch, it's really honing down that skill.
Absolutely. Okay, Eddie, after the pitching process, what happens then?
Assuming that we accept your pitch, then either you, the person pitching it, or sometimes occasionally we bring the developer on to take this step. We then go to outline. And outline is basically an expanded form of the pitch, but the difference is the pitch is specifically what I call a sales document. The idea is to get really rich to say, yes, this is a book I want to make. The outline is what you will be giving over to writers to actually make the book. So there's some overlap in what you want to say in the pitch, but it's also a lot of difference, because you can explain a concept in one way to an internal group to say, hey, this is from a business perspective, this is why this is going to be great, this is why this is a good product, this is why it's exciting. That's another thing to tell writers, this is what I need you to make. And outlines can vary. I tend to err on the side of longer outlines. I am, generally for a decent book, I'm usually about 15 to 30 pages for my outlines.
Mm-hmm.
I am no Dave Brookshaw. Dave Brookshaw, 50 or so pages for outlines. I've seen some people who do 10-page outlines. As long as you're communicating all the key information, the length of the outline is kind of secondary at this point. I find personally that asking writers to read a slightly longer document to answer their questions ahead of time is a lot better than giving them a sparse document, them not thinking to ask a question, and then I have to do heavy red lines on we'll get to the red lines on that later. But really, this is an instruction document, and it should have everything that writers need to know. When are your deadlines? How do you contact your developer? What are the formats we're using? What are the reference materials we have? What are the chapter breakdowns? How many words in each chapter? What those chapters are going to cover? If there's character work that needs to be in a template, what does that template look like if you don't already have it? Everything a writer needs should either be in that document or have a link from that document to something else for them to reference. So it really is a nice reference document for writers. And I have argued a number of times that sometimes your best and hardest writing when you're a developer is that document that no fan will ever actually see.
But like when you're trying to make a cohesive product, like it makes more sense to front load that work overall. Because if you can say like, this is this person and this is what they sound like, and here is a template for this monster type. So if there's 5 people writing monsters, they all write them the same. That's still incredibly useful, and something that I've seen backfire if someone doesn't do it. If someone's just like, give me a 2,000 word write-up on a city, like one person will do it in a way that has like sidebars and cool formatting and like, here's some interesting people you can meet. And one person will just write 2,000 words. And it's like, wait, which one do I want? Who do I have to fix? What am I doing? Whatever. Right. And so just saying like visualizing the book while you're outlining is really, really nice. Yeah. Because if you can visualize what you want the book to look like one thing I like about Eddie's Pugmire stuff is that there's different characters who present different sidebars depending on what the information is. And so if I'm writing on Pugmire and I'm going to write a sidebar, I go, is this an informational sidebar or is this a sidebar about the world? Like, which one is this? And I pick the character, and it makes it really easy. Mm-hmm. But like knowing that up front is helpful.
When I was first doing the outline for the Trinity Continuum, these many years ago, when I got to the allegiances section, I basically told the writers, like, I don't really know what this is going to look like, so try to reference each other's drafts and try to come up with a standard layout, and we'll work something up from there. And of course, since everyone's working on their drafts in isolation, they weren't really there wasn't anything they could do to really reference each other. So I got a lot of. It was similar, but there was a lot of work I had to do on my end to get everything to crunch together, and then Danielle after me. So definitely, if you're doing development work, you want to front load that as much as you can.
Well, for me as a writer, I'm definitely a write to crunch person. So if they're like, oh, you get to collaborate with everybody else in the section, I'm like, cool, I'm going to be finishing it 5 minutes before it's due. Just so you know, that's when it's going to get done. So if anybody tries to reach out to me and is like, hey, I want to see your drafts, I'm like, I got nothing. There's nothing. I literally will have almost nothing until right before it's due for the most part. So that's also extra pressure on your writers if they're on different schedules, because some people might do it right away when they get the draft, and then they're like, I'm going to see everybody else's, and somebody might wait till the last minute, and so they can't reference everybody else. And it's it's a whole thing.
I'm going to name drop badly, and I apologize in advance. But yeah, when I worked on a Futurama video game, I had the great chance.
Video game. I'm Eddie Webb. I worked on Futurama.
I worked with Patrick Verone, the head writer for Futurama. That's the name drop.
Anyway,
but one of the things he said, actually, which struck me and stuck with me, is that writing is a gas. It will always expand to fill the space required. So if you give a writer 6 weeks, they will expand to take the last 2 weeks, that's 6 weeks to write. If you give them 8 weeks, they will expand to take the last 2 weeks, so that's 8 weeks to write. Like I said, some people will be really excited and write immediately and get it all done, but most writers will generally either take more time throughout the process and take less time each day, or they will procrastinate. I'm certainly bad at this, and try to cram it in the last couple of weeks and get it done. So while this is a collaborative process, and we've been working in a lot of different ways to try to make this more collaborative, you can't rely on that. And it's Ian's a very valid point. It's the more developer up front can say, no, seriously, guys, do it this way, then there's less of that writers having to try to manage. And I can't do my section, so you do your section first, but I haven't started my section yet. So now I have to wait. I have 2 days to finish your section because you took a while to do your section. It's better to get as much out of that as you can, or on the flip side, proactively say ahead of time, I need this exact person to talk to this exact person and come to a solution. Could you get to me in a few weeks' time what your solution is?
Okay, we're about 17 minutes in, so I'm going to
That's fine.
Get the ball rolling. First drafts, which are usually the first thing that comes up after the outline. Well, once the writers have been hired, of course.
Right, yeah.
That's a pretty obvious step. We send them the outline, they write first drafts. Often we have a meeting early on in the process if we can. So that we can make sure we're all on the same page, nobody has any questions, and generally somebody will have a question that will spark other questions, which is super helpful to get folks on the same page. But past that, it's a lot of people, scatter like insects into their houses, and they sit by their typewriters and do their little pattern spider things, and they occasionally pop into the Slack and they go, "How large is Houndstone?" And then they go back into their spider hole.
I need 50 names of powers quickly.
That's oddly very much exactly what happens on our Slack channels. It's what is this one thing? Where okay,
I am saying this off of being in 12 Slacks at any given time for Onyx Pack. Yeah. It's aside from Slacks like Exalted and Scion, which have 50, 60 people in them, and there's kind of always a conversation. A lot of the Slacks, it's the Pugmire one, for instance, Eddie only pops it up when we're working on something. And so there'll be no activity for 6 to 8 months. And then suddenly there's people being how far are the monarchies from Pugmire? Thank you. And just sliding back into darkness. Right. But yeah, first draft's not a lot from us, aside from answering questions and giving materials to people as far as development goes.
Yep.
And get that sweet rush, as Dixie, that crunch rush. For us writers that have a problem with that. But moving on.
So after first drafts have been submitted, we have the red line process. Why are they called red lines?
Actually, Dixie knows the answer to that, doesn't she?
I mean, I know, I'm assuming just because it's the red ink phase. Of which technically you could also call editing red lines, so it's a little confusing. But red lines, the phrase comes from red ink in general, and a lot of folks still use red to do their track changes in Word. I don't. I actually use pink because if I look at red all day long, it actually makes me more aggressive. So I use a slightly nicer color when I'm looking at it.
Mm-hmm. And as a former teacher, I would like to be like, I understand that intrinsically makes, especially people in America, like have anxiety because they've had work that has been throughout their schooling redlined, literally. So it's a lot of writers have that kind of like red lines.
Actually, Mike, as an education person, I'm throw this to you for like 1 second. I know a lot of teachers, like when I was in college and since then, so, mid 2000s on, have moved to green ink for corrections, which I did try in Word, but it's just too close to black or it's too light and I can't see it. But like, how do you feel about like seeing like green, like, gentle corrections that smell like pine trees versus red, the color of blood and anger?
Okay, so if we're going to talk from an educational standpoint and also just a color theory standpoint as an artist.
Really quick though. I love color theory. Yes.
Yeah, so it does like you said, Dixie, it kind of gives you that aggression. So I mean, as a progressive educator, yes, we shouldn't use red ink. We should just kind of have a dialogue and use that failure that isn't a failure as a way to push us forward. But that's not always possible, and obviously, like we said, in like Word, it gets weird. Yeah,
it doesn't look great. I tried to go green with my personal track changes because it's just easier on the eyes, but it was so close to the black that I would like miss changes I had made. So the point of red lines, though, is that red lines are when we go through the manuscript, kind of holistically for the first time, generally, and figure out what needs to change as developers. Sometimes it's as simple as saying like, hey, I noticed that you use the British spelling of gray throughout the whole thing. Please fix throughout. And that's a very easy change. Technically, that could be something that could be done in editing, but if you notice it in red lines, like go ahead and fix it there because it makes more sense to fix it as soon as you see it. Or like, hey, I saw you used a lot of passive voice. Like, here's an example of active voice and how you can fix it. Then sometimes it is like, this whole paragraph needs to be rewritten from this standpoint, or I just realized that because of this other person's draft, this should be worded this way, and just making them all stitch together a little better so they can go into finals. Eddie, do you have any more to add to that? I'm sure you do.
The only other thing I'd really add, because obviously all that's really good stuff, particularly color theory, because that's just amazing. But I think the big thing is also it is very easy from a developer perspective to get very frustrated with writers, and it's easy for a new developer to take that frustration out in the comments. When you're commenting up to the writers, is like going, change all this, or this is wrong. It's really easy to think that, and you have to force yourself to. The goal is to educate the writer so that they don't make these mistakes in future. Your ideal goal should be, I want to teach this writer once what the mistake is, give them context for why this is not acceptable, and give them encouragement and advice so to make sure that the next draft they give me, the next project they give me, I don't have to have this conversation again. So I try to definitely move from a perspective of, here's what I want out of this, here's why I want that out of it. And also, I have a standard of, if it is a sentence, is a thing I want changed. Like you said, please change throughout gray to the correct spelling. If I am not sure where this is landing and I want to have a conversation, I'll end with a question. Which like, Hamilton is this big, but I've always thought of it as kind of this big, but I'm open to your idea. Let's talk about it. Well, what do you think? Because there's sometimes where I do actually want to engage and specifically want to dialogue with the writer because I want to see where they're coming from, or maybe their idea is better, but I need to be sold on it a little bit. So I definitely use the red lines as kind of the start of the conversation, not a directive from on high, if I possibly can. But that being said, I also try to, especially with new writers, give them context. It's like, hey, I and I think Matthew as well, we're all really heavy redliners. We would much rather go through and really aggressively rewrite and cut and change. And so I often try to give writers context, like to what Mike was saying. It's like going, I'm not telling you you're bad. I'm not giving you an F on your paper. I give you respect, brothers, because I do want you to learn. I want you to not only fix these mistakes, but actually even improve and elevate the draft. on the next stage. So I'd rather get all the work out here because it's less work for me down the line, and it makes you a better writer if we follow these instructions.
Okay, we are about halfway through, so trying to get conversation continuing.
That's fine.
As much as I would love to sit in any one spot and just talk about it forever.
You can't ask me or Eddie about process. We both love to talk about process. We both will talk about process.
And I'm just going to talk. By the way, my cat is jumping. Banjo is here.
Which one? Banjo?
Banjo. He's right here.
Hey, baby.
But yeah, next stage.
All right. Cat break.
Drink, I think, is the usual game for that. Cat, drink.
Yes.
All right. So after the second draft, sometimes, not in a lot of cases, but sometimes there is a second round of red lines and a third draft, and that usually
rarely.
Yeah, it's very rare, but it usually happens if there's been like a lot of writers have been replaced, or sometimes the developers themselves who have a slightly different vision of what they want going on. So they'll send the drafts back for a second round of second drafts. So
also, just like in real life, there can be miscommunications where somebody reads their red lines and they think that something means something and it means a different thing, and they just screw up second draft, and it's not really anybody's fault. But then we have to go through and fix it. Like it's so rare, though.
And in that case, often instead of sending it back to the writer, the developer themselves will just fix it. And I'm going to use that as a very smooth segue into the development phase.
So development phase is basically your last real stop before editing. There's one actually we'll go through probably real quickly, but generally speaking, this is the developer's going to rewrite, get things back, because sometimes a writer either didn't do the changes you wanted to, or much more frequently it wasn't quite the way you hoped they do it, or even you see a pattern emerge in the last drafts. Oh, I should really standardize that. One thing that I continually try to tell my new developers about, and I will bang on this drum probably for the end of time, the ideal is that once you're done with development phase, if everything fell apart, you should be able to hand this manuscript over to layout. You want to get as clean as possible before it goes to editing. And if you go, well, that'll be fixed in editing, I personally believe you're developing wrong. You really should be getting as clean as you possibly can. Dixie's making lots of love eyes and hearts at me because she knows how passionate I am about this. But it's
also because you know what my life is like when someone goes, "Let's just fix it in editing," but then when like 25 people do that, like every writer and the developer is like, "Yeah, we'll catch that later." I'm like,
right. But also, it's people are going to see different things. You're going to think this manuscript's perfect, and the editor's going to find a whole bunch of things that you didn't see, and that's good. But if the editor is catching those things and not the things you would have caught, then stuff's still going to slip through. So the cleanest you can possibly get is what you want at this stage.
It's like I don't know, like a beer or a water treatment plant or whatever example you want to use, where there's multiple different filters.
Yeah.
You want the end result to be as clean as possible, so you're going to have different kinds of filters in the way to catch as much as possible. Mm-hmm. Stuff that makes it past the first level will hit the second level or the third level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And like there are people that will occasionally, for whatever reason, have to like rewrite a chapter in development that shouldn't usually happen. It happens every now and then for reasons. Either something went a different direction, or something sat too long in second drafts and the writer has been paid and it's better to just do it yourself at this point, or what have you. But generally development paths, like if your outline and your red lines were what they should have been, the development path shouldn't be that bad.
Right.
Like that's why I always talk about like front loading it with the outline. Is like if your outline is super detailed, Matthew was in chat earlier saying that he also does detailed outlines, which he does. Yep. I wrote some monsters for him recently, and all I had to do was fill in a goddamn template. And that was easy. Like, they were like, here is a template. Fill this out 5 times for the 5 things you were writing. Here's a template. Fill this out 9 times for the 9 things you were writing. I was like, can do, buddy. I filled out forms in my life.
Yep.
Much, much, much easier than someone who's like, I don't know, write some bad guys.
Yeah, that's not fair. Like that's the thing, is that's not fair. Like you get like, or you send things back and like your developer goes, well, what do you mean? Like this is what you sent me, and it's like, well, that's not fair to them. It's not a good look, I guess, for everybody.
Right.
So that's development. Development's a lot of like, why did you do this? But also, yeah, you did this great, and then making a book out of it.
Yeah, like a book should be according to the developer's vision. So the development process is just sort of sanding off the rough edges and banging everything into place just so it fits that mold, that silhouette. Yep. Mm-hmm. Then there's the manuscript approval.
So that's the part where Rich or White Wolf might disagree with the development's, the developer's vision, as we just talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the big thing is that in an ideal world, the pitch and the outline phase got the approval pass ready for what they should see in the manuscript. Mm-hmm. And so ideally, they look at the manuscript and go, yep, that is all things we expect to see in this book. Please move on. The reality is that it's very natural. Sometimes manuscripts evolve in the course of production. Something you thought would take 20,000 words to write, turns out you covered it in 5,000 words. A topic that you didn't realize was important when you start digging in, it's like, oh, we really need to talk about this. We need to put 10K in this. We need to put a sidebar here to really cover this topic. So we need to think about the context of it. Mm-hmm. And so this is the last big pass for all of the people who need to approve it, to look at it and go, okay, this content needs to be here. This content's missing, whatever. That said, we really don't often have a ton of heavy writes and approval. Sometimes it happens, and usually happens with core books is the most often, because a core book is a brand new thing, and so people are going to have different opinions of what that game needs to be, and also this is landing this way versus that way. So there are some books where it goes back to the developer 2 or 3 times because they have lots of comments for approvals. But I'd say 80% of the time, it's usually either just thumbs up or change these handful of things, and you're happy to move on.
Yeah, it's more of an issue with licensed works, but again, if you've got all the outlines and manuscripts beforehand taken care of, usually it's a fairly smooth process. But for the stuff that Onyx Path owns, it tends to be like it's rich, right? Like there might be usually it's something like, hey, I put a pun that I think is funny in here, and Rich goes, no, that's too much.
Yeah.
That's usually about as far as it goes with stuff that Onyx Path owns.
Well, I mean, there's a couple times where Rich has really pushed back on a couple of manuscripts because they just really weren't landing the way they want to. But again, that was for newer games. Like for Pugmire, we had a long talk about the way Pugmire landed a little bit. We had a long talk about Dragon because Dragon was a brand new thing for Scion. And usually when Rich, those Onyx Path owned or very close to Onyx Path games, Rich usually has a pretty strong vision of what he wants to see. And so when he actually is not getting quite what he wants it to be the best possible game he can make it. Mm-hmm. Whereas if there's a licensor involved, he doesn't always understand what they want. So sometimes he's really focusing on, okay, I'm happy with this, but let's see what the other licensor says to make sure they don't have any other concerns.
Yeah.
So it tends to be a lighter touch on licensed stuff, but that makes sense because we don't know what the licensor wants.
Right. And like Rich is our creative director, which is important, but also he's also open to conversation, just like we talked about during Red Lines a little bit. Like if you think that something that you wrote really has a reason behind it, and like maybe I wrote something in Pirates Pugmire that I thought was brilliant, but that Eddie was like, I don't get it. And I was like, let me explain it to you. And once I explain it, you're like, oh, yes, okay. Like Rich can also have those kind of conversations with us where you go to him and you're like, here's why we need this, or here's why I think we need this. And you can have a chat. And like sometimes it's yes, sometimes it's no, but like he's not unreasonable. Like he'll listen to creative folks.
I mean, to be clear, when I say Rich has really strong vision, I can see people could interpret that as saying it's Rich's way or no way, and that's just absolutely not the case. I've certainly, I think, at least Dixie and I and Ian have all been in conversations with Rich where Rich is like, what about this? And then we go, nah, we talk around. He's like, yeah, no, it's fine. Okay. He's like, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, let's do that. So he's definitely reasonable, but also he has a ton of experience. And it's worth respecting that. And a lot of times he has points that are very, very valid. We go, okay, yeah, well, actually that makes a lot of sense. We should probably have done that. And let's go ahead and fix that right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like Rich started working with White Wolf magazine like 35 years ago. So
he's a lot.
He has been in this industry.
Oh my God, I just turned 35.
You're as
I'm
old as Rich's career.
34. That's okay. Cool.
Rich has been doing this for longer than two of our panelists have been alive.
I just turned 35. Well, I mean, I could have been like 3 months old when he started. We don't know. But yeah, no.
So the next stage is post-approval development, which, I mean, we've basically covered. It's if Rich or the licensor has notes on stuff they want changed, post-approval development is just the process of having that changed. Usually it's the developer making a few tweaks. On very rare occasion, it's something we have to send back to a writer, but it's not like the whole book is getting rewritten sort of thing.
Yep.
Then there's editing.
Oh, do I have to?
Yeah. It is literally your job.
It's a very important process.
Yes. So whether I do it or somebody else does it, sometimes I edit things myself, sometimes I farm them out. I'm not going to get too far into that. We've got freelancers that edit, plus me, who does a lot of the core books. But sometimes I'll do small things too. It just depends on what is on my plate on any given day. Editing really, for Onyx Path's purposes, what we call editing should really be called copy editing. While we will occasionally push back on things, especially if something is coming across as problematic or some phrasing is a little off or what have you, which is more of a content editing, most of what we do is under the umbrella of copy editing, which is mostly just fixing grammar and spelling. Onyx Path has its own style guide where we, like I was saying in the chat earlier, like we want to use American spellings for the most part. So like armor should not have a U in it. Gray should not have an E, it should have an A. We use toward and ford instead of towards and fords. There's lots of like little tiny nitpicky things like that. And then also there are some specific things for Onyx Path style, such as using numerals when you're talking about attributes and using spelled out numbers for anything over like 10 and up otherwise, et cetera, et cetera. It's all these little tiny things that I noticed, and that's why I got my job in the first place, like in 2015, but also just things that we care about because we want consistency, and we're not perfect. That is one thing that I want to like throw out there. Editors aren't perfect. People pick up a book occasionally and they're like, I found a typo on page 45. And it's like, yes, we're still human beings.
This book is ruined.
Yes, the book is ruined because we accidentally missed a typo. And also typos can not just come from this. They can come from layout. They can come from developers changing things post-editing. So don't get super big mad at editors if you see like 3 typos on a book. It happens. But yeah, so mostly we are trying to make the text the best it can be before it goes to layout. That's really kind of what it comes down to. And sometimes our editors will bring up questions like, hey, I see you wrote this thing, but like recent history or in the past 2 years, the discourse has changed and we try to speak about it this way now. And that's fine. Like we'd like to hear that, especially when the developer maybe isn't as young or on the pulse of culture as some other people can be. Like I love all of our developers, but some of them are,
old
cis white dudes in their 40s and 50s. And sometimes I have to be like, we don't use this word anymore. It's not like it's offensive, but it's not great. Like there's better ways to put it. So we do a bit of content editing and a lot of copy editing.
Unlearning some stuff has been challenging. Like just not for Onyx Path, but just in general as a cis white dude in his 40s. The one that's given me the most trouble is casual use of the word crazy.
That's actually something that tweaks me a lot, and then I know other people don't realize they say
that is exactly why it's been like, I know it's a big deal for you, and I'm trying to stop myself from saying it, but it's just something that's been so natural to me over the last 30 years.
The thing is, me 2 years ago was constantly like, that's insane, and now I'm like, oh God, why did I say that? Because we're always learning and growing.
Right.
Yes, we are.
I said people were blind to things or deaf to things, and now I work with Eddie a lot, who has hearing loss, and like that's something that I think about now when I like think it even in my brain. Is I'll like think like, oh, he turned a blind eye, and then I'll be like, is blind eye problematic? And I like think about it, and I sit with it, and I look it up, and I learn, and that's a completely separate conversation, but it's super important, especially right now with what's going on out in the world. Is like listen and learn and listen and learn. And I said some bullshit when I was 23 that I would not say now.
Now, along the same lines, not so much problematic, but just an expression. Someone on Twitter posted earlier today, I guess we can't use the phrase, I'm going to avoid that like the plague anymore.
I saw that because obviously humans don't avoid the plague.
Nobody cares about the plague anymore.
Look at the US right now.
Just not something we do.
No.
Yeah.
I'm going
it's so
to
bad.
avoid this
It's so
like
bad.
the plague.
All right, so generally, as far as editing goes, though, either me or one of my wonderful, wonderful editing staff, I have quite a few people that I contract out to, goes through the manuscript, does all their changes. We do it in track changes, so the developer has the chance to say no. Because sometimes I'll change something and it can be wrong. Like, I don't realize we're producing a new term. Or I don't realize that something is a game term because we have like 34 games we produce and I'm not perfect.
Sure.
And so they have the chance to reject it. If I'm really unsure, I'll leave a note that's like, I don't know about this. Like Eddie, in Pirates of Pugmire, you had that new monster you introduced.
Mm-hmm.
And in like chapter 3, they were mentioned, and I was like, I Googled this. I don't know what the fuck this is.
Right.
And then, as it turns out, I found it in the monster appendix, and I was like, "Oh, that's what that is. You should define it earlier if you're going to mention it on page 23."
Right, and sometimes the reason why we do it that way also is because sometimes the edit is not directly correct, but it does lead to a larger, okay, this is not clear, and so like the extant edit that's provided is rejected, but then I then rewrite around it to make sure that there's a better phrase to get close to what's going on. But sometimes also it's wrong. For example, this is not directly from editing, but I love telling a story because I think it's hilarious. On Aberrant, I had lots of people going, "Oh, you wrote Papal Bull and it should be Papal Bill," and it's like, no, it's not. It's a Papal Bull.
It's not.
I can't. I live with a Catholic, and like I couldn't with that one. I was like, no, like papal bull is a thing.
Right. Exactly.
Also, the conversation of whether or not to capitalize papal, and it's like, no, it's the Pope. Like it's lowercase all the time. Unless it's like Pope, blah blah, the whatever. Then it.
Yep. Exactly, but I mean the thing is like like I said, we use a very specialized lexicon, and also sometimes a lot of writers use some pretty opaque or obscure terminology. And for games like Vampire the Masquerade, that's actually explicitly encouraged. We want that kind of Baroque, almost Victorian feel to our language, and so occasionally the editor's going to go, "I think it's supposed to be this word," and it's like, actually, no, that's the correct word. But in my experiences, particularly with someone like Dixie's edits, I find most of the time it's just me staring at a screen going, accept, reject, accept.
The Rat King.
The Rat King.
We have like 18 minutes. We have so much to get through.
This
is very hard to talk about in an hour.
Post-editing development.
Just what Eddie said.
Yeah. Indexing.
Oh, that's also me. I'm not going to talk about this too much because I don't do the actual indexing, but I send it to an indexer or indexer, depending on what kind of person you are. And my indexer goes through it. It's apparently a 2 to 3 read-through process. I am not familiar with it. I'm not an indexer. It's a very different skill set. But they read through, they find all the common terms. They read through it again. They see how often these terms show up. They put the terms in alphabetical order. They put them in weird little flows when they need to. Indexing is a strange and arcane art to me that involves reading books multiple times and somehow getting a workable index out of it. And I bow down to our indexers.
The people that do it.
Right. Yes, I couldn't do it, and I love that they can. I thought about learning once, and then I had TR Knight, who has indexed a lot of our books, kind of go through like, oh yeah, I have to read it like 4 times, and I'm like, reading it once kills me. Like, what are you talking about?
I assume basically it comes out to we give them money and they produce an index, and there's some kind of magic that converts money to index.
There is a reason they get paid close to as much as an editor for their pass. Like, it is just as important as far as making the book usable, and it's also like an actual skill you have to hone. It's not something that you could just pick up and do.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying that indexers are underpants gnomes?
Yes.
Oh yeah, they're like step 3 profit. I haven't seen that since I was like a teenager. Yes, cool. They are. Yeah. They are the step 3 profit of the process.
Yep.
Okay, and then we switch over to the art side of things.
Forget that. That's Mike.
process. Usually around the time that the manuscript is completed, the developer will put together a bunch of art notes and send them on to Mike. So while editing and everything is going on in parallel to that, the book is being art directed. And so the art direction phase is usually Mike going through the art notes, finding artists whose style might be appropriate to the book, and contacting them, hiring them, and getting them to submit their art. And that moves on to the layout process.
Also Mike.
That is also Mike. Layout process
Not this Mike Cheney, by the way.
Yeah, no, I can't lay out for save my life. I watch Meredith do it, and it's like magic. So I don't.
Yeah.
I just realized that people might be thinking that I was like, oh, that's Mike's job, and then we just talk over you.
No,
and I'm like, no, wait, no, different Mike, Mike Cheney.
No, that's Mike Cheney, not me.
So this is when the raw text becomes what looks like a finalized book. And I'm sure that people who have read our manuscripts on Kickstarter can contest that there's a big difference between the raw text of the book and how the book looks when it's done. It's just like there are concepts that I have had so much trouble trying to take in just reading the raw text, which even though the text is the same, just looking at it nicely laid out, it just seeps right into your brains.
One thing I will say is that Mike is really good at looking at art notes and seeing what might be boring as fuck. Because I know that I did, like, me and Eric Zawadzki kind of tag teamed the art notes for the Deviant Kickstarter. And one of the things we were doing was contracting Samaraya to do the chapter art. And Mike was like, 3 of these 8 pieces are just people talking. And I was like, you are correct. That is boring. And so I was like, do whatever from the text looks better. And he just does it because that's why he's an artist and I'm an editor.
Yeah. Mike is very good at what he does. And
absolutely is.
And there's another panel with him and several other people from the art team later on in the convention. So if you head on over to the Onyx PathCon website, onyxpathcon.com, scroll through the schedule to find out where that is. So the layout process, Mike starts that before the art is in. He's contracted the art, then he finishes the layout, and then when the art comes in, he sort of slots that art in. And sometimes Kickstarter backers will see sort of the interim process where the book is laid out and some of the art is in, but there's still some pieces missing. At the end of that process is the proofing process, and I see some of you in chat were talking about the page XXs. This is where a lot of that comes in.
I can't.
Would anyone like to go over proofing?
Yeah, so proofing. So basically, at this stage, this is the last chance for the developer to have input on what the book's going to look like. Like we talked about, there's kind of from editing to layout, it kind of falls out of your hands as a developer. I mean, as opposed to editing development, but really, a lot of your stamp on it has kind of missed this point in time. But ideally, you're not reading the book from cover to cover as a developer at this stage. You should already be very comfortable with where text is at. You've read it several times. You had a chance to the editing pass. The layout has not changed the substance of the words. So instead, you're looking for how the words are landing on the page. Is this sidebar next to this concept that it needs to be discussing with? Is this art either reflecting what's being discussed in the text, or is it at least interesting enough that it's not detracting from the text? Are the page numbers correct? Are the breadcrumbs, which are the headers and footers, is it referencing the chapter correctly? Is it referencing the section correctly? Are the conditions and powers formatted in the right style? Because sometimes the layout person has recognized that, oh, that's supposed to be a condition, but it's formatted as a power. Page XX, I dislike the joke at this stage because it very rarely happens anymore. Because it's easy to search PDF for XX and replace the words. But also, we save that for a much later stage. At this stage, we're not doing page numbers because text can move and change at this stage. Maybe like, oh, crap, I need to put in a paragraph here because I realized that this topic was discussed. Or sometimes it's like, there's 3 sentences on a whole new page. Can you cut the text down to fit to the 2-page spread we're trying to shoot for here? So sometimes that happens in the proofing stage as well. Mike will ask me to cut words or add words to fit to the space of the book that we're trying to make. There is some rewriting that happens at this stage, but really what you're trying to do is just say, is this, like Dixie said earlier, when you're trying to visualize the book in your head, the outline stage, is this now hitting what you visualized back at outline?
Right. Also, like, one thing I will beg to the community while I have this platform for 5 seconds is when we do our errata passes, which we'll get to in a second, please don't tell me there are page X's because we know.
Yeah.
We haven't done them yet.
Yes.
The joke is that it is immortalized on Salt's character in Chicago. It's on the hoodie. It's immortalized.
It is not just that, though. No. That was immortalized on the V20 leatherette when they put XX on the fucking spine. But the point is, people will try to be helpful during errata and be like, there's page XXs on these 18,000 pages. And I'm like, I know! You haven't done it yet. Okay,
yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, often when we ask people to submit errata, we specifically say, please don't tell us about the page XXs. We know we're going to get to them at a later stage, and then people do it anyway. So
I'm going to make it a checkbox you have to check on future errata forms where they have to check. I acknowledge that I have not entered a page XX.
Did you write this? No. Like,
I'll kill you. No, I wouldn't. I love you all.
Okay, after proofing, we have 10 minutes left. After proofing, things go to press.
Right. Magic.
Yes.
Done. Don't know how that works. Should have probably had Matt on this panel. We send things to press. Either we release them as PDF only, which is very rare now. I usually release it as a PDF, and then we order. My cat's getting on the desk. And then we order POD proof so that Rich and Mike can both look at it and make sure that once it's printed on paper, the colors look good. No art turned out too dark. Nothing got weird. And so, like, they want to see how it looks on paper before anybody can order a POD of it.
Right.
And that's a very important stage because we have had books, including one that nobody's really noticed, but that is actually out in the world like this, where occasionally 2 pages are just like a little darker than the rest of them for no reason, or a little more saturated. I know in Lunars, which I'm working on inputting the errata for right now, we had like 2 pages where the sidebars were inexplicably bright red instead of dark red. And it's like, why did this happen? I don't know. And for a minute, I saw somebody in the errata being like, the red's really hard to read. And then I looked at it and I was like, oh, you're not just being annoying. Like, that actually is like an error where suddenly instead of being like a nice, like deep maroon, it's like red in your face. And I'm like, yes, that is hard to read. You're correct.
I'm going to cut you off for just a second. Travis has pointed
Do
out
it.
in chat, hey folks, be active in chat because we're about to give away a PDF of the Trinity Continuum core rulebook.
What? We're going to give away some Trinity core.
Oh, no. What?
So post an emote or ask a question or just say, thanks for being here, Onyx Path. Ian, I love you. You know, anything at all.
It a little bit there, buddy.
You can post Onyx successes. You can post Onyx botches, which is what I think you should post for Ian.
We've got
Treated. Jeez.
I think now's question stage. I think maybe.
Yeah, let's ask some questions while we're still in here. Thank you for everyone telling me that you love me. I appreciate it.
I believe you because I can't see it.
No, we got like C. Kane Live. Thanks for being here on Onyx Path. Ian, I love you. Haru Kane says, Ian, thanks for pushing Trinity to come back.
Somebody said I was their hero in the last stream, so unless you're somebody's hero.
Well, no, someone did say that Ian was Canadian, therefore their favorite. So
Scandal.
I spent so much time dyeing my hair green today.
So we have a few minutes left. Does anyone have any questions that we can answer, preferably quick questions?
Yeah. Come on.
Join in 1 minute. Everyone say hi or ask questions.
Go.
If not, I'm just going to start playing Animal Crossing right here on stream.
Yeah, we'll start. Yeah. How's your island doing?
My island is amazing.
Yeah.
I am slowly kicking out all of my shit villagers to add in some villagers I like.
Yeah, I'm glad. I saw y'all's picture, you and Mare, and I think Danielle and some. Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah. No, it's just it's pretty
TKT
cool.
guy says most difficult book to develop.
What most difficult book?
Yes, most difficult book to develop.
Well, I know it's a common answer for me, but frankly, for me, it was definitely Pugmire.
Your first one? When I developed the first book, I was terrified, and it got me. It just, I didn't know what I was doing. But
I think it's most people's first book, though. Like I've only developed a couple of things, but like honestly, doing that original like Monarchies of Mao adventure collection was just me constantly being like, Eddie, am I doing it right? Eddie, tell me I'm doing it right. And sometimes you would point out things and I was like, how did I miss that? And then I have anxiety and I'm an editor, so I'd be like, how did you miss anything? You're the worst person ever. But really, Eddie didn't say that. That was just me.
All right, raise your hands, everyone who spent 8 years trying to get their book out.
True. I feel like Ian actually wins this.
Yeah, I'll give it that.
Eddie can attest to me having broken down a couple times during development.
Yes. There was lots of talking you off a ledge, yes.
It wasn't pretty, but it got done, and there are like 18 books in development now across the Trinity Continuum, which is fantastic, and I'm so happy that we finally rolling.
Somebody asked the perennial, what clan is everyone question?
What clan? Lasombra.
Tremere.
Also Lasombra. Although Toreador, if it means I get to take selfies, so.
Really? Wait. Hollywood Lasombra? Really?
I can't imagine you as a Lasombra, you anarch scum.
Well, okay, I do have that, but that's that willpower of driving through things until you get them done. Like, that's that kind of Lasombra attitude. More like second edge Lasombra. Like
okay, all right. So you're a pirate, got it.
No, not a fucking... Yarr! I'm a fucking pirate. Everybody's a pirate, and all of our names are Black or Dark or Night or Noir or whatever.
Actually, yeah. What someone in the chat just said, I'm going to go ahead and just flip my answer and say Deva because way cooler than any of the Masquerade ones.
Oh.
Okay.
Chronicles developer. Oh. No.
David's cool. Hey, I love Chronicles. They're awesome. I'm going to be running a Geist game later this weekend, so you guys, speaking of which, y'all should come and
it looks like Ravina666 won the PDF. Congratulations, Ravina666!
Congratulations.
Awesome.
Woo!
I hope you like it. It's a great book.
It's a really great book.
You spent 8 years on it.
Yes.
It's true.
No, Trinity Card's fantastic. We have like 4 minutes if anybody has any more questions. I just took over from Ian. I feel really bad. I'm sorry. It's a reflex from the Pathcast.
That's true, because you have to derail us.
I am weirdly actually the one that keeps us on topic sometimes, where like we get so far derailed, and I'll like 20 minutes in, I'm like, speaking of.
No, you're correct. I should say you re-rail us.
There we go. Favorite drag queen, my friend Alexander Surian, who is Eva Destruction from Atlanta.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she's great.
I believe.
Like, if I'm gonna call out anybody, it's gonna be like someone I know. Like,
I was gonna say all of them. They're great. I don't know.
Drag queen's great.
Fire Emblem's Three Houses house. Oh God.
Jeez,
probably
guys.
Black Eagles, but maybe Ash and Wolves.
Y'all with these games.
What Harry Potter houses are? Am I? J.K. Rowling is a TERF and fuck her, but Ravenclaw.
My house is.
It was Ravenclaw, although I think now we're doing what benders we are, and I'm going to go with waterbender because I could be a bloodbender, and that sounds fucking awesome.
That is pretty awesome.
There actually is a good question. I do want to talk about real quick because a good one to wrap up on is how different is development working on licensed IP versus an IP you own, and I feel like I am uniquely qualified to work on that. With a licensed IP, a lot of times you're coming into a set of expectations from a licensor. They want you to do a certain thing with a book, and they want to go a certain direction. And sometimes that direction is not going to make a lot of sense to you. Not because it doesn't make sense at all. It's just that they have other expectations and ideas going on that you may not be aware of. And so it comes down to what may appear to be arbitrary restrictions. And you have to work within those guidelines. And sometimes you can push back, and sometimes you can ask for leniency and leverage. But the reality is you got to work with what you're given. Whereas an IP we own, we can make a lot more decisions. So if Rich is like, hey, let's try a cool thing with Trinity, we can just do that.
Yeah, we can really like also just like mold things through meetings and stuff. Like if we own something, I every time about the clamps, like you just
the clamps.
But yeah, we can really mold something. We can have meetings about it. We can change it. We can like just make it what we want.
Recently had that conversation with Ian about Anima. I was like, no, my dude. And we were like, it was like, all right. It was cool. It was great.
Yeah, no, it was wonderful. All right. That's it, right?
What,
We're done.
1 minute. 1 minute.
One minute. Okay.
All right, I think we'll wrap everything up.
Just Kermit arms for 1 minute.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this panel. This has been Eddie Webb, Dixie Cochran, and Mike Tomasek. I'm Ian Watson. We're from Onyx Path, and we hope to see you for the rest of the weekend.
And y'all should donate.
Yeah.
Donate money, please.
If you type !charity into the chat window, wherever direction that is, it'll post up a link to the charity spot on our website, and you can donate there. And this charity thing up above Mike's head will go up if you donate.
Mike, what's there? What is that?
Where am I? Where did this come from? Yes, awesome. All right. Yeah.
Any horns, one part.
No.
Yay! Did it.
Woo!
I hope nobody is upset that I said fuck.